Om. 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 Om Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantira Pashanti Roshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet. Sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu. Sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om.
The shameless one, your spirit.
Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmaheti Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. The last few months, we have been looking at these different themes that occur in the different chapters of the Gita. So before we closed for the summer recess, we were looking at the themes that occur in chapter 14. The 14th chapter of the Gita is titled Kshetra Kshetrajna Yoga. Kshetra means the material universe, and Kshetrajna, Jna, means the knower of this material universe. Essentially, understanding the relationship between what in religious terminology we say matter and spirit. Every one of us has a different way of looking at the world, and we tend to make categories or divide the world in terms or using the categories that are relevant to us or that are most important to us. So if someone is very active in politics and that's what they think most of the time, then the world around them, they would tend to think in terms of, for instance, here we'll say, how many are Democrats, how many are Republicans? Or if someone is very much into sports, say baseball, then it would be like how many are Sox fans and how many are not. So we tend to make these divisions based on the things that are close to us, things that are important to us. As students of Vedanta, one way to categorize our experience is to look at the world and ask, how do I divide this experience that I have? And one way that is especially emphasized in this 14th chapter is to look upon the world as this division of two, matter and spirit. The word for matter that gets used not only in the Gita but in many Vedanta texts is Prakriti. As opposed to matter, the spirit, the principle of consciousness, the word they use is Purusha. And so here it is Kshetra, the field, literally the field, and Kshetrajna, the knower of the field. Now it's not just about looking out, it's also about looking in. Now, out and in are arbitrary categories, because when we say something out or something in, we have to ask out with respect to what, or in with respect to what. And usually, when we use these words, the world out there or what is happening within me, the boundary is usually our body. So anything that is not a part of this body is really the world that is out there. And everything that is happening inside, and all our feelings, emotions, thoughts, we visualize them as something happening inside this boundary of the body. So we call them these inner things. So when we make this distinction between material things and consciousness, we also have to look within and see whether everything here is conscious. And that same distinction can be made, the Gita points out, even when we look within. And then we suddenly discover, we begin to at least ask questions, whether this body that I have, the mind, in which category do I put them? Do they belong to this category of consciousness, or do they belong to the category of the material world? Now, clearly we know we are different from tables and chairs. That's why we say those things are non-living or inanimate, and we are living beings. So it would seem as if all of us living beings, we are principles of consciousness, and everything other than whatever is living would be material. But if we look at it more deeply, in fact, that's probably what inspired the title of the book that we will be studying on Wednesdays, Vivek Chudamani, Looking Deeply, because it is so much central to anything in life. If we look at something superficially, we get one view. If we look at it deeply, we see things which we may have missed before. So if we look deeply within ourselves, or whatever we see as myself, then it gives us a chance to ask questions. So when we say myself, am I this self, is it one entity? Well, it is. I don't think I'm many people unless I'm schizophrenic or something. But I just see myself as one person. But nevertheless, I still am able to make this distinction. In fact, we do. We say, this is my body. Then we all know that we have a mind which have filled with thoughts, emotions, feelings. So although I'm one person, I still can point to distinct parts of my personality. There is the body, there is the mind. And if you want to dig even further, the mind itself is sometimes divided into mind, intellect, ego, and so on. So the more you look, the more divisions you can make. Now then we can ask the question, now all of these different parts of my personality, where would I classify them? Would I put them under material objects or consciousness? So my body is conscious really, because, well, now that I'm speaking, I'm reacting, you are listening, so we are all conscious beings. And all of this activity is occurring through our bodies. But then we can ask, does the consciousness of my body belong to the body? Is it inseparable from the body? And then we will realize that no, it doesn't seem to belong to the body. Because if it belongs to the body, no one can ever separate it from the body. But we see that there are times when the body is not conscious, at the very least when we are asleep. And of course, in the end, when we are dead. So when a person dies, the body doesn't disappear. The body is still there, but it's no longer conscious. And so one way of looking at that situation is, if consciousness were an intrinsic nature of body itself, then the body could not exist without consciousness. But we see that the body does. So if something can be separated from something else, then that thing is not the intrinsic characteristic of that thing. So since consciousness can be separated from the body, ultimately at death, but even there are moments when we are unconscious, and definitely when we are asleep. So body, therefore, is not considered conscious. These are the kind of insights we get when we look at the books like Gita and other Vedanta texts. These thinkers were very bold. Not only were they satisfied. Anyway, I'm getting confused with that construction. So they did not stop at just characterizing the body as a material object. The material nature of body is not that difficult to understand. Today we even know the chemical composition of the human body. So that is material, it's pretty easy. What about the mind? Is the mind a conscious entity, or is that also a material entity? Now these thinkers said the mind is also material. And how do we know that it's material? And one way they said is that it follows all the laws of matter. One of the ways material laws is that when construction of any object is really a composition. You're composing different parts at the subatomic level is the atoms and molecules, but even otherwise, you just bring parts together and a new product is formed. So starting of a new product is composition, and when that product dies or is dismantled, it's decomposition. That's why we speak about the body getting decomposed when dust returning to dust, everything returning to just a heap of ashes. So the same thing they say applies to the mind itself. In fact, if you think about it, there is not much difference between the body and the mind. Everything that happens to the body happens to the mind as well. The body gets tired, the mind gets tired. The body needs its nourishment. The mind needs its nourishment as well. If we keep on eating junk food, the body falls ill. If we start putting junk thoughts and ideas into the mind falls ill. And both have their doctors. So everything that's true with the body is true with the mind. Except that you can see the body, you don't see the mind. But just because you don't see something doesn't become any less of a material entity. No one has seen an isolated electron for that matter. But there is nothing very spiritual about an electron. It's just that it's too subtle, that we don't have, our eyes cannot see it. And then we might say that even science probably has not advanced to that state yet, when it can see an object which is as subtle as a mind. So anyway, they characterize the mind also as a material entity. So there is something else within us which is neither the body nor the mind. And then that is the real spirit. The word that is used in the Gita for that is the Atman, the self. So the only non-material part within us is the Atman, the self. So right now, our identity is that of both matter, body and mind, and the spirit, the self. Now, although when we are discussing like this, it's easy to kind of break it up into three parts like this, but none of us feel ourselves to be merely a collection of parts. We just feel like we are one being. But it's good to recognize this distinction, because the Gita points out right from its beginning, from the second chapter, that the spirit is birthless and deathless. So if anybody is celebrating their birthday, that birthday belongs only to the body, because the spirit is birthless. The spirit is also deathless. What dies is the body. What changes, what keeps on changing, is the body and the mind. The spirit is changeless. So what this 14th chapter says is recognizing the distinction between that which is changing and that which is not changing, that which is material, that which is not material. That is at the heart of Vedanta practice. So verse number 23. If you have copies of the Gita, you can open it. If not, that's fine also. Just listen. So this is how the verse goes. Ya evam veti purusham prakritincha gunai saha sarvatha vartamanopi nasa bhuyo bhijayate. He who thus knows the Purusha and Prakriti together with the gunas, whatever his life, is not born again. So one of the phrase that gets used often in Vedanta text is not being born again. And now that as a worthy goal to strive for, doesn't seem that attractive. You say, if you ask someone, would you like not to be born again? Doesn't sound that attractive. But if you ask someone, would you like never to die? And he said, oh yeah, that's something who wouldn't want? In fact, people are already trying that. Is there a way to be here forever, to not die? Except that if we are not born, we will never die. So birth and death go together. And so when the texts say that you will never be born again, what it also means is you will never die again. I was speaking with a few friends, and one of the questions that can often come up, especially on your birthdays or on occasions like that, was, what have you learned in life so far? And I think that's a question worth asking. All of us can ask that question occasionally. And maybe a birthday is a good time to do that. We can ask ourselves, what has life taught me so far? And I'm sure all of us will have different answers, or some of the answers might be overlapping. So one of the things that many of us, or at least some of us here who have seen a considerable part of life so far, may find that one of the things that can occur in the life of a spiritual seeker is that things that one found interesting and meaningful at some stage of life may no longer feel that much interesting and meaningful in another stage of life. Things that didn't make sense before probably start making sense now. So these are the kind of changes that do occur. And so that's what this verse points out, is that never being born again, what we do discover is that the repetitive nature of life. A friend was mentioning to me that if you look up, those of us, nowadays very few people really read a newspaper because so much is available online. But if you look at any headlines of a day, and then maybe go 10 years back and look at the headlines then, go 50 years ago. And nowadays, because of everything being digital, it's so easy to go back in time and search for old data. What will be interesting is that you pick up a newspaper of any past decade, it's things that are happening in the world, that happened in the world then, and things that are happening in the world now, not much different. The details might vary, but essentially that's what it is. There are going to be conflicts, there's going to be resolution, there are going to be some great achievements, there are going to be some terrible failures. That's exactly what's happening. And after some time, if one again looks deeply, one will see that things tend to repeat. That's why the Groundhog's Day movie became so popular, because it resonated with people. And that doesn't apply only to some international events or national events. That's true with our life as well. Look at the lives of the members of your family, your cousins, and even distant members of your family or your friends, and look at your own life. We will see that it's pretty monotonous. We don't like to think of it as such, but day after day after day, our life kind of falls into a certain kind of routine. We meet a certain number of people. We are busy doing a certain kind of jobs. We have certain interests. And no matter how wide-ranging our circle may be or our interest may be, there is only so much you can do in a 24 hours. There are only so many people you can meet. And so even when we speak about the world as a whole, which might seem to be a very big place, the actual world we dwell in day after day after day is a pretty small bubble. And then maybe occasionally you go on a long vacation or a trip, maybe you might meet some new people. But otherwise, by and large, most of our life we live in a kind of a bubble. So our actual operating world is pretty small. And all of that, what we call our world, is something that is connected with us in one way or the other. And it's still very repetitive. When that happens, then one begins to ask questions about birth and death. What does being born mean? And to have to go through this whole scenario, the childhood, schools, assignments, homeworks, teachers, and of course illness, and nursing homes and hospitals and fights. And then we say, isn't a human life just a kind of a bundle? It's kind of a package with different ingredients, but the ingredients are kind of in different proportions. But all of us have that. Some successes, some failures, some friends, some great experiences, some terrible experiences. And then one asks, do I have to go through this again and again and again and again, endlessly? And then one begins to ask, is there a way I can be free from this repetitive cycle? And what the Gita points out in this section is that if I can look at life as objectively as I can, it's never going, all the people speak about objectivity, even in academia, there is so much talk about being neutral, being objective. None of us can be as completely objective like a camera. It's like if I have a camera by my side here and a camera sees you, the camera is being completely objective because the camera is not reacting to whatever the camera sees. But as a living being, when I see something, I can try to be not be judgmental. I can try to not react, but we will react. But if I can do that, as much as it is humanly possible, we will then begin to question the meaning of birth, the meaning of death, and then ask that there should be something better on offer than having to go through this life after life after life. And that's what this section of the Gita points out, that the more I'm able to see this distinction. Now, who is the one who is seeing? One of the insights we find here is that the material parts of my personality are a product of this world, all these atoms and molecules and so on, the body and so on. But the experiences that this body is having through the body and mind, that the word here used for that is Purusha. What is really meant is the word some of you may have heard, it's called Jiva, the spirit that has gotten identified with this body and mind. Now beyond this person within who is experiencing the world with all its joys and sorrows and the body itself, there is a higher being. The word that gets used in the Gita here is called Paramatma, or Purusha Paraha, the Purusha who is beyond this Jiva. Now that higher being is just observing everything, not reacting. So there is this body, there is this one who is reacting, it's called the Jiva, the individualized soul, and beyond that is this witness self, the witnessing consciousness. Then the question is, what is the relationship between this being who is reacting and responding to the world and then this higher witness? How are they related? And this relationship is best described in an analogy that is given in at least two of the Upanishads. And this is an analogy of two birds. The scenario presented is this. So here is this tree, and there is this one bird. And there's lots of fruits on the tree, and the bird is relishing it. The bird keeps on pecking and tasting the fruits. Some of the fruits are very sweet, and the bird is having a good time. Then, suddenly, the bird kind of pecks on one fruit. It turns out to be extremely bitter, terrible. And then this bird says, "Oh, this is awful. I'm never going to eat these fruits again." And that's what happens sometimes in life. As long as everything is going fine, we are just kind of sailing through life. Then something terrible happens, something unpleasant happens, and we are like, suddenly we withdraw and say, no, this is not good. Kind of a temporary withdrawal, a temporary kind of a renunciation occurs. And then we kind of fall back. But after some time, when that bitterness, that unpleasant experience kind of disappears, then the mind keeps on saying, well, not every fruit is going to be bitter. I was a bit unlucky, so let me try some other fruits. And then this bird then starts pecking at some other fruits, and once again finds some good fruits. So this is how the bird keeps on eating the sweet fruits and the bitter fruits. And that's the kind of experience we have in life. That there are things which make us happy, and there are things which are bring us pain and suffering. And our life, therefore, at present can be described as both sukha and dukkha, joy and sorrow mixed together, one coming after the other. So this story of the bird then continues saying that this bird, when he was eating these fruits, sweet and bitter, happens to look above. And then when this bird looks above, he finds another bird right there on the top of the tree. Now that bird, which is on the top of the tree, is not eating any fruits at all. He's just sitting there calmly in meditation, as if. And that there is a kind of an aura around that bird. The bird is shining and seems so peaceful, so joyful. So this bird which is below looks at that bird and says, that's a wonderful bird. And maybe I should go near that bird and look at that bird more closely. So this bird hops on to a higher branch to go closer to that upper bird. But when he goes onto the upper branch, there are some more fruits there. So he gets again distracted and starts eating these fruits once again. Again, some bitter fruit comes. Again, he says, "Oh, no, I don't want to eat this." Then again looks up and says, "That's where I want to go." Goes on a higher branch. So this is how that story continues. This bird getting distracted, and then a momentary vairagya, the renunciation occurs, goes closer, looks at that bird, goes higher and higher. Until at last, when this lower bird has gone close enough to the upper bird, the effulgence, the light of that upper bird seems to engulf this lower bird. And it engulfs it to such an extent that this bird gets absorbed into that light and makes a very startling discovery. And the discovery was there were really no two birds at all. There was just this one bird all along. But this bird had somehow seemed to have forgotten or fallen asleep and was dreaming as if I am this bird eating these fruits. But really, this one bird was all along sitting quietly. So that's the analogy to our own life. This being within us, within this body and mind, who is experiencing this world with all its joys and sorrows, is that lower bird, tasting the different fruits of life. And there are bitter fruits as well, and that generates some kind of self-questioning that generates self-inquiry, that makes us turn to find answers to these basic questions of life. And then we find an ideal. That ideal can come in many different forms. It can come in the form of the way we think about the divine. That ideal can show itself, become more tangible to us in the form of divine incarnation, prophets, saviors. Somehow it becomes more tangible. And we look at them and we say, oh, that's the ideal. That's where I would like to go. That's how I would like to become. But then as we are thinking about that, once again these different fruits of life are around us. And then we get distracted. And then our whole life can be seen, even as spiritual seekers, our life can be seen in these terms. We have this higher ideal, higher goal. But while we are pursuing that goal in our life, we meet all these different fruits on the way. It's almost as if you're going on a long drive. Maybe from here you're driving to LA, let's say, cross-country drive. Now, if that's where you want to go, and if there is this one highway, so you take Route 90 just across from east to west, you don't have to leave that Route 90. You can go straight to the west coast, just sticking to it. The problem is there are so many exits on the way. There are so many rest places on the way. And you say, oh, it's a long drive. Let me take an exit and see just what's there and just kind of rest a little bit. That's how it occurs in our life. Even when we have a higher goal, a higher ideal, even as spiritual seekers, we say, I want to have a vision of the Lord. I want to be spiritually enlightened. But somehow, that idea that that's a far away goal, that's going to happen after a long time, it's like a long drive. And so we say, yes, I'm pursuing that. I'm doing my daily meditation. I'm doing my daily prayer. But I have a long way to go. And so, because I have a long way to go, why don't I just take these occasional exits, a stop at the resting places? Now, there's nothing wrong in itself in doing that, except that we know the more stops we make, the more detours we take, the more exits we take, the longer it is going to be for me to reach my destination. It's possible that some of the exits I take, there would be some wonderful experiences I have, and I might spend much longer time there than I had originally intended. And that's why in spiritual life, not everyone makes the same amount of progress, even though they may have spent the same amount of time doing things that we associate with spiritual life. So the question is how many times I pause to taste these different fruits. So that's the example given. And so what these books point out is, if I can hold on to the ideal without stopping, just focused on that, then success is very near. The word that sometimes gets used for this is sincerity. One of our very senior swamis, who was in the head of our center in LA, Hollywood, for many years, Swami Prabhuvanandaji, once told one of his students that the one quality you need in spiritual life that will help or guarantee success is complete sincerity, total sincerity. And that's a very profound statement. And it also gives us a chance to reflect on what does it mean to be sincere. And I would encourage you to kind of dwell on this thought for some time whenever you get a chance. Just ask, what does sincerity mean to me? And by my own measure, by my own standards, would I consider myself a sincere person? And it's very rewarding to ask that question. Years ago, I remember, I found the word sincerity being used in a context which I would never have thought would be appropriate or possible. And the teacher probably must have been some Zen book. I don't remember exactly. But what the teacher was asking the student really is this, that when there is a lion in a forest and a lion spots a prey and wants to go and attack and pounce on that prey, the prey doesn't yet know that the lion is here. So the lion kind of quietly crawls, goes there. Let's say a deer is there who's kind of grazing, is not aware of the lion has come behind the bushes. Now the lion has come pretty close. All that remains now is just one final pouncing on that prey. And at that moment, that's what the teacher is describing, that at that moment when the body of the lion is kind of crouched completely, kind of ready to, with that spring action to jump on that prey, at that moment, the teacher says, what is the quality most obvious in that entire being of that lion? The whole body, every muscle is kind of crouched with this whole goal. That's the prey. This is the distance I need to cover. With this speed I need to pounce. And the whole concentration, the mind, the senses, the body, everything with just one goal. And then the teacher says, it's total sincerity. And he says, with that, if it all fits in perfectly, then that lion would be able to jump and catch the prey. And it's a pretty violent scene in some ways. But you get the point that if we are serious, whatever goal we might have, in spiritual life it really means knowing oneself or transcending these human limitations that we have. If that's the goal, and if I have charted out a way that this is what will take me to that goal, how much of sincerity I have, how much of the time, the energy, the faculties, how much am I employing them in acquiring that highest goal? And this question is important because many times people do feel, oh, I have been praying for so long, I have been meditating for so long, and still I don't see, there hasn't been much change. And that can be sometimes very depressing, because when we read the lives of these great mystics, and it's so charming, it's like, oh, they had these great visions, they had these great experiences, and we look at our lives and say, well, I have been doing it now for so many years, I have read so many books, I've attended so many lectures, so many retreats, and I don't know, I don't seem to have made much progress. If we feel that way, then I think it's very important that we can ask this question, how much of that kind of sincerity that we find in this analogy of the lion completely focused on achieving his goal, how much of that sincerity I have? Now, we don't have to feel too bad if we find it's not like 100%, but at least we know the reason. If we haven't become enlightened yet, it's because maybe I can do more than what I have been doing so far. I can do better than what I have been doing so far. And then that provides the motivation for us to do better. And that's true as much in spiritual life as in other things. If you want to be a long-distance runner, and maybe you run for a couple of miles and you're like totally exhausted. And then if someone says, oh, 2 miles is what I can do, no more than that, then that's fine. But if I say, no, is it really? Can I not do more than that? Can I push myself just a little bit more? And then you say, well, if I try harder, if I practice more, maybe tomorrow I'll be able to do 2.5 miles or 3 miles. And eventually, if I can do 26 miles, I can run for the marathon next time. That's how it is. Same thing in spiritual life. If I keep on saying, oh, if I try practicing meditation, the mind gets distracted, doesn't work, so I'm not going to try further. I'll try just sitting for 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day. Sure, that's fine. It will definitely bring some benefit. But can I push myself a little bit more? If I find that my limit is reached after 10 or 15 minutes, can I say, let me push a little bit more and say, let me meditate 15 or 20 minutes more. That's how we can increase our capacity. And if we can do that, then the meaning of sincerity will become more and more clear to us. But that is what the Gita is pointing out here. Let me read one verse before I close. Verse 32 in chapter 14. Yatha sarvagatam saukshmyat akasham nopalipyate sarvatra vasthito dehe tathatma nopalipyate. As the all-pervading space, because of its subtlety, is not tainted, so the self existent everywhere in the body is not tainted. So the idea is this, that we know that there are times in life when we just feel little lighter and brighter because things are going well and we're just feeling good about it. And those are wonderful times. And all of us have experienced such times in life. But there are also times in life when we feel heavier, when we feel sad, when we feel withdrawn, when life doesn't seem that much fun anymore. And at that time, we don't feel that good about it. So the question is, this Atman, the self, that self also is going through these ups and downs because I am the self. And what this verse points out is no, the self in its real nature doesn't go through these ups and downs. And the example given is that of space. Well, space, again, don't think of just kind of outer space, any space. So just as things happen in space, everything happens in space. We wouldn't be able to even live. The bodies cannot survive unless there is some space where the bodies can be. But the space itself is not affected by it. Well, I mean, to kind of give see, we now are affected by this virus. That's why all of us are masked and we have to take all these precautions. But the space in which this earth, the planet exists, the space in which we all are, the space is not affected by any viruses. But without the space, none of these could exist. The example sometimes also given is of the sun. In the light of the sun, good things can be done, good things are done, but terrible things are done as well. But the light itself remains untouched, whether the good and bad things that are done. So our true nature, who every one of us really is this being who is untouched. The good and bad things that occur by the body and mind. All actions occur in the body and mind. But the real me is not affected by any of them. Really. Now that word really is very important because we are affected by what our body and mind do. And we are affected by that because somehow I begin to see the body and mind as me. As I identify myself with the body and mind, then everything that the body and mind does becomes my problem. The karma of the body becomes my karma. The karma of the mind becomes my karma. But when I'm not attached to the body and mind, their karma belongs to them, not to me. Which is why when you are fast asleep, when we don't even identify with the body and mind at all, no karma affects us. We are beyond karma in the state of deep sleep. Except that we cannot remain indefinitely in deep sleep. Sometimes the question is asked, what is it that wakes us up in the morning? Why can't, since the state of deep sleep is such a peaceful state, every time when we are lucky enough to really have some good sleep, peaceful, restful sleep, when we are not even dreaming much, just restful sleep, next morning we feel so wonderful. If given a choice, some of us say, well, I would love to stay in that state of deep sleep a little bit longer. But we cannot. Even if you have not put any alarm, even if you have no engagement the next morning, even if you decide I'm not going to wake up, we still wake up sometime or the other. So what is it that wakes us up in the morning? And so sometimes these books say that our karma wakes us up. Our karma is waiting by your bedside, saying, okay, you have had enough rest now, enough of fun. Now wake up, I have some more joys and sorrows to give you. Wake up, wake up. That's how we cannot sleep indefinitely. But there is a way to not be affected by joy and sorrow. And that is why we don't have to do that only in deep sleep. Even when we are awake, if I can maintain that awareness, just as I try to look at the world objectively, can I look at myself objectively? Can I look at my body objectively? Can I look upon my thoughts objectively? The moment I make something an object of my perception, I'm creating a space between it. See, for instance, if this book, now I'm able to read the title of this book, but if this book were like right here, obviously I wouldn't be able to read anything. In order for me to read it, I have to create some distance. And that's kind of a very simplistic example. But in order for me to look at my body objectively, look at my mind objectively, look at my thoughts objectively, I have to create some distance. And creating the distance, I know then I'm someone separate. But if I don't create that distance, this whole thing becomes like one unit. And that's the story of our life. So there are these different ways that the Gita describes, but finding meaning in life, finding joy in life, avoiding suffering in life. Essentially, no matter how that goal is described, people speak about salvation or moksha or nirvana. There are many different terms employed. But if you kind of boil it down to, at the experiential level, what are we really seeking? Essentially what we are seeking is a state in which there's going to be a lot of happiness, unending joy, and no suffering of any kind. That's essentially what we want. How we get it, what name we give it, how we visualize it, there are lots of differences. But that's essentially what we want. And one simple takeaway for this would be, the more I broaden myself out, the more happy I become. The more I constrict myself, the more I limit myself, the more I suffer. And limiting ourselves to this one body and one mind is the cause of our suffering. When I stop identifying myself with just this one little thing, if I begin identifying with everyone and everything, I can be the happiest person. That's where compassion comes in. That's where empathy comes in. Why should my happiness be, for instance, if I get to eat ice cream and it makes me happy, but when I see 10 other people eating ice cream, why shouldn't that make me as much happy as having ice cream myself? Because I think this body is mine and therefore whatever ice cream I get, I'm eating. If you are eating, that's your body, and I have nothing to do with it. In fact, if I don't like you, if you are eating ice cream, it pains me. But if I can begin to see that this whole world is one continuous whole, that every body is my body, every mind is my mind, then more the number of bodies, more the happiness, more the joy. That's what expansion means, expansion of consciousness. So there are lots and lots of ideas, and going forward we'll try to reflect on this a little bit, but with this understanding that I might share with you a few thoughts and ideas here, but what this is meant is for everyone then, because we meet once a week on Sunday mornings. So the rest of the 6 days before we meet next Sunday, try to see if at least one or two of these thoughts, if they make sense to you, if they resonate with your head and heart, try to dwell on them, even if it's for a few minutes every day. Because that's the way to grow. That's the way to become strong. It's not enough to just attend once a week a lecture or a sermon. It can help, it can give us some ideas. But if we want to truly grow, if we truly want it to change our life, then we need to reflect on it. You don't have to agree with everything that I say, absolutely not. But reflect on it on your own. And if that makes sense to you, then you can say, well, if there is a ring of truth to it, then we have to say, how can I live that way? Because ultimately, how we think is important, but ultimately what we do with our life is even more important. Our thinking should inform the way we live. So that's the message that comes to us from this chapter of the Gita. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. So we will meet again next Sunday at 11, as we did today, and continue this study. But also, this week we will resume our Wednesday evening study group. And as most of you already know, that the text that we will be studying is called the Viveka Chudamani. The textbook that we will use, this book that was recently released called Looking Deeply. So you don't have to have this book. Even if you have some other edition of Vivek Chudamani, that's fine. But in the class, we will be using this text. So if you want a copy of that book, it's there in our bookstore. You can also order it from Amazon if you find that is more convenient. So Wednesday evening, 7:30, study group, Vivek Chudamani. Those of you who can come are, of course, most welcome. If you cannot come for any reason, we will be streaming that class as well, just as the satsang is also being streamed. And once again, I appreciate all of you coming, and it seems to be going fine. So let's continue this way with masking and everyone remaining vaccinated. And if boosters become available, get them whenever you are eligible. And let's hope that we may not have to wear masks indefinitely. And so let's hope that things improve, and we will this in Vedanta we speak about already 5 coverings, koshas. Now is there a 6th one we've already got now? So, and if the goal of life is to remove these layers, I hope this layer comes off well. So even when you do your daily prayers, even when you pray for yourself, please also pray for everyone in the world. We know that how much suffering this has caused, both in terms of health, lives have been lost, people are sick. Even now, the hospitals are getting filled up. Lots of jobs have been affected. People have been, there's been an economic thing. So it's a massive disaster. And of course, I don't have to tell you that. Every one of us is already aware. So please remember everyone in the world also in your prayers. And let's hope that things improve. So we'll go to the closing prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. As we did last Sunday, please remain seated and we'll go row by row as you are directed. So don't all get up at the same time. Thank you.